Good evening. I'm Jeff Moore, Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities, and I would like to welcome you to the 7th Annual John T. Washington Lecture. I would like to thank our Director of Africana Studies, Dr. Kabibi Mac Shelton, for organizing the event and asking me to be here. Tonight I have the great pleasure of introducing my dear friend and colleague for the last 30 years, Executive Associate Dean Lyman Brodie, to present tonight's lecture. I really do mean the pleasure, as I've been a great admirer of tonight's speaker since I met him many years ago. We believe we performed together as part of the Dallas Wind Symphony in the late 80s or early 90s before actually formally meeting when I interviewed for the assistant professor of percussion position right here at UCF in the spring of 1994. In all the years that I've known Lyman, and with all the people that I've spoken to about him, I can tell you that he is not only respected and held in high regard, but he is in fact the real deal. And what do I mean by that? Simple. The expectation is that older, more seasoned people are supposed to be wise, and Lyman is. He is the real deal. With great life experiences comes great empathy and understanding. In Lyman's case, he has empathy and understanding in abundance. He is, of course, the real deal. Whatever the situation you find yourself in or a question you have, Lyman has a story or some advice that can help you respond to it, because, after all, Lyman Brodie is the real deal. I'm beyond thankful to have Lyman and Jan Brodie in my life, and I'm proud to call them my friends. I've been on the receiving end of so much great advice and wisdom over the years. I feel I owe much of any of the success that I've had to Lyman. His steady hand as a mentor saw me through the professoriate ranks into administration and higher education leadership. And like most of us lucky enough to be in Lyman's inner circle, I owe him more than I could ever repay. That is one of the reasons I'm so excited for you to hear Lyman's lecture tonight, which I'm sure will include observations, stories, and advice on shared values and shared life experiences. I regret I cannot be here with you tonight in person, but in great Lyman Brodie fashion, I have an orchestra gig that I just couldn't get out of. Without any further ado, please join me in welcoming your John T. Washington lecturer for the evening, Mr. Lyman Brodie.
So, hi everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, terrific. To give you a preface for tonight's program, this is not going to be a sit down and you be quiet in the audience. Okay? This is a conversation tonight. And I thought before we actually got started, how many of you actually knew John T. Washington in this group? All right. We have a great friend and mentor of mine, Janet Balinoff here. Many of you might remember Janet from being here at UCF for many, many years, giving us much needed advice and all the time that we Janet always had the right words, the right ways to phrase things, the right ways to get things done. Janet actually knew John T. Washington very well. And I asked her to just to say a few words about him from her perspective, because I think it will set the stage for what we do today. Okay? Janet, please.
Thank you very much. It's my honor to be back on campus. I was here from 1980 to 2014 as Director of Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action, running the program that Jan Brodie put into place and John Washington had championed as a concept along with Minority Student Services. John Washington, as an associate professor at that time, had a heart for students. And I know that's so easy to say, but please believe me when I say I mean every word of it. He could walk across campus and call you by name, and your major, and your name, and your mama, and everything else he knew about you was for your support. Not to get you in trouble for not going to class. He knew when you were supposed to be in class, but he wouldn't say that. He would say, how's it going in computer science, whatever program you were in? And you would know that you were supposed to be in class, or you would say, we have a study day today. He was an individual student's mentor. He knew everyone who came in contact with him and how to support them best. And those approaches were different. In the early days, before the bookstore area was named the John Washington Center, we had a celebration after he passed. And one by one, those people who knew him dwindled. And they were replaced by people who were introduced at this particular celebration by saying, I never knew Dr. Washington, but I hear, and it was my privilege to know him as a person who supported students, and that's how I remember him.
Okay, that's the segue into your fun today. Okay? I should tell you that I kicked around this idea with the dean for the last several weeks. And a real focus that I've had for most of my life is community building. You know, what makes a strong community? What makes us function? What kinds of things are really important to each one of us, no matter where we come from, no matter what kind of background we have, no matter what kinds of disciplines we all serve. But what things are very common to every one of us in this room right now? And in fact, the entire campus, the entire community. And as I was going through this, you know, I talked to Dean Moore a bit, and he said, well, what you're talking about are shared values and shared experiences. And I said, I think that might be the title. So we're going to run with it, with the underpinning of building a strong community, shared values and shared experiences, and what builds a strong community. What are those components that we all possess? Every one of us has some of these things, okay? So I thought we would start by just kind of giving a simple definition, okay? So shared values might be something like common beliefs that we all share. You know, beliefs in what? Well, I thought about that for a bit, and I said, the first word that came to my mind was safety. We all want to be safe, don't we? Is anybody here, like, you know, not being safe, riding a roller coaster without the strap on, getting in your car without the seatbelt on? You know, nobody likes to do those things. We like safety. But then under that I thought, okay, so what kinds of things fall under safety? I said, oh, well, wait a minute, let me see here. There's something I like a lot too. I like to eat. You know, right now we have terminology that talks about food insecurity. We've not suffered that today, I can tell you. But, you know, but we like to have food, right? What's another common thing? Okay? Now, I'm throwing things out here, but don't be bashful. Be free. Talk. This is like like when you're in church, you know. You know, when the guy says, "Please say amen," and echo, you know, what I'm saying. Okay? What's another thing that we share?
We like a roof over our head.
Bingo, shelter, right? Right. So, what other kinds of things do we share? Common things. Just think about that. We all share them every single day. What else?
Education.
What?
Education.
Education. We work at a huge institution that's focused on the education. Okay? And what's important about, let's say, education? What else would you put under that heading? There you go. Now we're making progress now. We're talking about freedom to do things, right? You know, to go places, right? Now, in order to go places, what do you need?
Transportation.
Transportation, all right? And what do you need transportation for? To get places to do what? Bingo. All right. Now we're making progress. You see the connection? You know, we need to start looking, at least in my mind, we need to start considering what these kinds of things are, how they impact each one of us, and what's simply unique to every individual, no matter the background, no matter the experience, no matter where, you know, if you grew up in a house that was, 500 square feet or one that was 3,000 square feet. We all share those kinds of things, right? Okay? So let's have a little bit of a discussion on the different kinds of shared values that actually exist. I'll just throw one out for conversation. All right? Let's make family values. What does that tell you? What kind of family are we talking about when you look at family values?
I don't think you can say blood family only. There are individuals without blood connections, but you can say those individuals you have made into a family by choice.
As one of my friends always talks about it, she says, there's the family you're born into and the family you choose. You know, and I would submit to you that everyone in here is part of that family. We all come from those kinds of experiences that are unique, really, to a lot of us. Okay? What other kinds of values that might exist? What kind of other things outside of family? What kinds of other kinds of things would you subscribe to? I see a bunch of my friends from different places in here that are part of what we call a what?
Community.
A community, right? They're the community values, aren't they? How important are those community values? What kinds of things come to mind when you think about that? Groups? What kinds of groups? Organizations? What kinds of organizations? Church is one.
Clubs.
What else is there?
Clubs.
Social groups?
Yep.
What else is there?
Student clubs.
What?
Clubs.
Clubs, right? Different kinds. What else is there? There's a myriad of things we can throw out, you know? But again, I want this to be a conversation we have today, you know, so that when you actually leave, there are things that I want you to walk away with. Okay, here's some more things I think I can do to build this community. You know, what things am I not doing? Am I not involved in the community? Am I not involved with some of these civic activities? Am I not involved in, well, marching nights, right? Right? There were like 430 of you guys out there on the field now?
Yeah, so.
Just I mean, there's a community, you know, but actually when I went to one of the football games and I saw Dr. Kaiser, and I thought I just had to go and shake his hand because I said, how do you control this thing? 430 students marching in the same direction at the same time. Think about that for a second. Okay? But that's another part of our value structure. Are we going in the same direction at the same time? That's a unique value that we all have in different kinds of contexts. What other kinds of values do we have? Okay?
I would say volunteers in the community. If you've chosen a particular cause and you've given yourself to help, stray dogs, help children who are foster children, you've made yourself a part of that cause, showing that you value those students or those people or those dogs, whatever it might be. You have given yourself to that ideal.
And I would also say that given the lay of this room, I know many of you that have given yourself to a lot of those causes. I've seen how you do your research. I've seen how you teach. I see how you care. You know, those are the kind of things, again, that make a strong community. You know, what we're trying to do with a regular part of our activities is build on what we have. You know, that's one of the reasons why these lecture series were started. You know, we have in history the Pauley series, the Shoffner series, the John T. Washington series. These are all built on the shoulders of people that came before us. You know, they made things happen from the days of FTU to now the migration to the UCF. You know, many of those people you don't know, some of you never even heard of, right? Except for the lecture series or something, you know. But many of us actually knew all of these people and knew what they stood for and how they have poured into the lives of students and faculty over the years to make this a much stronger place. So that kind of falls under workplace values, doesn't it? Right? So anyway, so you leave your house, you got your family values, wherever they are, you know, it's your kids, your animals, your whatever, you know, whatever makes up your family. You know, you have those things, right? But then when you leave home, you now migrate to a new family, don't you? Right? It's the workplace. And you spend a significant amount of time in this working environment. You know, wouldn't it be nice to continue to build that as a stronger community as well? Okay? And then when you leave the workplace, you go to, as Janet just said, you know, you go to the volunteer part of this thing, or the whatever you do. I mean, in fact, that was I'll throw her under the bus, because before I walked in here, I got a call from Kerry Watson, and you all know Kerry Watson. Not many people here don't know Kerry Watson, right? So in the background of talking to Kerry Watson, I heard, I said, either that's a trombone or a chainsaw. And it was her son practicing, you know. And I told her, as long as it doesn't sound like a chainsaw. But the point is, you know, we all share those kinds of experiences, you know, where we're encouraging one another daily, you know, on to good works, on to better works, on to better things that they can do. You know, that's part of this whole shared value piece. Okay? So, what's the impact of these shared values? Okay? One, I would say, would be strengthening relationships. Okay? The more we grow together, the more we grow in common ground together. We may have different, you know, you may not like Mexican cuisine, I do. Okay? Somebody will say, nah, I prefer Italian cuisine. I say, I like that one too. You know, you say, maybe I don't like that. Maybe I just like that old-fashioned meatloaf and mashed potatoes. I can roll with that too. You know. But you know, we come from different places. I always get a kick out of when I was growing up. You know, the kinds of TV shows that were on, you know, like most of you only see on what's the thing on cable now? It's called something old TV or whatever it's called.
Turner Classic Movies, things like that.
Well, those kind of things, right? But you know, I always got a kick out of watching Leave It to Beaver. You know, because they always had dinner at the same time every night. I said, what family does that? Because that never happened in my house. You know, it's like, hey, we got something to eat. Come on in. And you better come now before it's gone, you know. But there's family values that have that structure built into them. And not until, honestly, I got to college that I experienced some of that kind of thing, you know. In my neighborhood, and when you had food, people always cooked more than you actually needed. Because if somebody just happened to wander by, hey, get another plate, you know. But then I was exposed to people that said, this is what we got. We're not giving out anymore. This is all we have. But that was an experience. And I didn't know anything about that. But then I learned, because this is a different way of doing something. Okay? Again, we learn from the experiences, and we create value structures. Okay? You know, and again, as we keep this conversation going, I want you to think about that, and then we'll have a bigger conversation at the end of this to kind of talk about the nuances and differences that we all have, and then find this common denominator that crosses all of our lives. Okay? All right, so workplace values. Another sort of impact, okay, I just mentioned it a bit, was guiding behavior. You know, I love comedians, right? And I remember one little joke that one kid went home, you know, after going to visit his friend's house, and he goes home and he asks his mother, he says, Mom, how come everything at Tommy's house works? You know, or the other one where the young man goes home and he goes back home but when he goes over to his friend's house, they said, well, we're going to have burgers and hot dogs and such. And so he says, well, where do you keep your ketchup? You know, and they open the refrigerator and they see the big bottle of ketchup. He says, but I thought you had a ketchup drawer. Because what they would do is when they went somewhere, they collected the packets, they put them in the drawers, and that's where the ketchup came from. It didn't come out of the refrigerator. Again, different experiences, right? And all of a sudden you learn a new behavior because you have a different experience. I will also put out to you here that these are the things that are building blocks of the community. Shared values create cohesive and supportive environments. Right? So, all right, let's move on a bit. Let's talk about shared experiences. Now here, this is my favorite part, because my background, as most of you all know, is in music. I never heard a symphony orchestra until I was 16. You know, I had no idea it even existed, you know, because again, in my neighborhood, in fact, I remember there was an interesting concert I played once a few years ago, and it was a Beach Boys cover band, and so there was one of the Beach Boys numbers that had a trumpet solo in it, and the guys came and said, "Oh yeah, you know this piece, man? It's a famous tune, Beach Boys. It's really popular." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry about that. They weren't playing Beach Boys in my neighborhood." I said, you know, if you're talking about Martha and Vandellas, or the Four Tops, or the Temptations, or James Brown, or Jackie Wilson, oh, yeah, we're okay. But I said, there wasn't any Beach Boys going on. You know? So that was a different experience. But you know something? I learned to play Beach Boys real fast. Because that's what the job required. Again, building these kinds of things. These are important experiences. So, I want to throw out to you all, what kinds of experiences have made differences in your lives? What's been the most pivotal thing that happened? Just anybody, just tell me, just one thing that made a significant impact as far as an experience that you had that came out of nowhere. You were invited to something. You were attended something. You were asked to do something. Come on. This is a conversation. Yes, please.
Well, my sister and I were raised, this is my sister. We were raised by a single mom who was a teacher, educator, and so her ideas for fun extracurricular activities was like either go to like the library or the park or like activities where they didn't have a lot of money wise. And so like those experiences to the library kind of really shaped my love for reading and my love for education as well.
Strong influence, isn't it? Okay. What else? Yes.
About 11 years ago, my son came home with a flyer for Cub Scouts, and now I'm about to have an Eagle Scout, so that was pretty unexpected.
All right, good. What else? Please share. You guys not that asshole. You didn't eat that much food, right? Anybody else?
I'm going to say poverty. It echoes what our first speaker said, but it's much deeper than that. When you don't have any money because you're a single mother, never expected to be widowed with a 6-year-old, had no money management skills whatsoever. And it affects you all your life to not have a ride to college, even though you knew somehow you were going, to have to find a ride with someone, to not have a car when other people could go wherever they wanted, to not have an opportunity to go to a university that had accepted you because there was no way you could get there, much less start in with books and winter clothes and things like that. That kind of experience drove me all my life to serve the first the first generation student, the person who had never been, who needed to know the tricks, the lore that gets you through school without giving up. That drove my career.
Yeah. Great examples. This is the whole career was built around service. Okay? And we all servants in different ways, every day. Any other examples, please? Yes.
When I was 16, predominantly white neighborhood in New Jersey. Out, and I experienced a lot of racism and very, the best experience for me and my family. And then I moved to Southwest Florida, and I saw a lot of people that looked at me and a lot of more diverse communities, and that's what I longed for. And I think that was a experience in Florida.
Terrific. Great examples. Anybody else, please share. Yes.
Back to our single mother educator. When I was in the 5th grade, she didn't force me to, but she strongly encouraged me to read the graphic novel Mouse because it's about his son talking about his dad's experience in the Holocaust and surviving that. And so that really strongly influenced my path to studying history.
You know, the interesting thing I've always found about every one of these unique experiences spawned the next experience, didn't it? You had the first one, right? And then you were interested in what's the next one? And then what's the next one? And what's the next one? You know, again, this is part of the human experience in totality. You know, every one little thing that we do is just a seed planted that makes us go to the next one. My daughter calls it when I go down the YouTube rabbit hole, you know, and I start to watch some recording of somebody playing something. I go, oh man, this was really good. And the next thing I know, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm listening to the 10th recording of something, you know, and people say, you need to go to bed. You know, you have to go somewhere tomorrow. But, you know, but it's a learning curve that sticks with you. But when you have that very first experience, it's almost like you know, when Ponce de Leon showed up in Florida, I wonder what this place is. And he goes, Florida. So there you go. All right, so we're building community. All right, so we have personal experiences, we have social experiences, right? We also have cultural experiences. You talked about going to a concert or going to something. You know, when I heard the symphony orchestra when I was 16 years old, for some reason, I heard the person that was then playing trumpet in the orchestra became my teacher, became my mentor for life. You know, and I heard that sound, and I went, holy cow, man! You know, I think I want to do that. Whatever this guy's doing, you know. And so, you know, but those are the things that hit you. Now, of course, you know, growing up, as you just described, there weren't a lot of people in symphony orchestras that looked like me back in those days. and I tell people all the time, if I had a dime for every time anybody asked me if I played jazz, I'd be rich right now. Because I played in the symphony orchestra. What? Well, which one? That one. You know. But because, you know, we tend to pigeonhole one another. We like the idea of putting you in a box, you know. So you must do this, or you must do that, or you must do the other. And then we get surprised when we see someone and go, wow, look, who knew, you know. That's sort of one of the Rodney Dangerfield lines, you know. And he was criticizing Eddie Murphy at one time about the kind of humor he does, and you all know if you don't know Eddie Murphy. He said, yeah, you really shouldn't be doing that stuff. It's not good, you know. It's, you know, it kind of grates us. No, it's just not good stuff. And then 3 years later, Eddie Murphy tells a story about how he ran into a Dangerfield at some Las Vegas, you know, place, and Dangerfield walked up to him and said, who knew? You know, you just never know what's going to happen. And I tell people that every day. You never know who you're talking to. You never know who might be the next influence for you. You know, I know people, but George knows many people like that. George Wormchuck, for those that don't know, he's our professor of saxophone and everything else in the music department from one time to another. But we know, for example, of stories of people that were playing casual jobs, like, you know, playing some background music at a wedding or something like that, that now it turned into a lucrative career because the right people were there to hear them play. Or the right people might be with you to make the next suggestion of, hey, I'm working on a new project. Can you join me on this? You just never know how those things will go. Again, developing that career and that shared experience. So we have personal experiences, social experiences, cultural experiences, you know, and what's the real impact of this? This is really, I think, a real focus for me. What really happens? Think about this for a second. What really happens when you have that experience? What are you all actually doing? What's happening when you have that experience?
Growing.
You're growing. What else?
Thinking.
You're thinking.
Learning.
But there's something that you're creating that's going to be lifelong. You're doing what? Creating a memory. That's what I'm looking for. Okay? Because forever and a day, after you have that experience, and especially when you have it with someone else, now you have, again, both the shared experience and what else? The shared value. Right? Because now you're sharing something together. Ed was talking about, where'd you hide, John?
Yeah.
Do you leave? Where you at? Well, that's not good. You won't have a seat at the ball game now. Anyway, John Whiteshell was here a few minutes ago, and Ed Jones, my good friend Ed Jones, and he shared seats next to each other at the basketball arena. You know? And that, again, that's a shared experience, creating a shared value. They like basketball, so you know. But there's how we make these things happen. We create memories. There's something else that we also do. You know, and somebody's already said it, but I think it's a very important thing for you to consider. You foster something that's really, really important to every one of us. Come on, don't be bashful. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's an important answer, though. What now? Community is one of them. But the word I'm looking for is empathy. That you start to learn something about someone else that you didn't know about yourself. You develop that piece of it. Now, I never thought about it that way. You know? I mean, and especially in the climate we live in, it's very easy to say, I don't believe you. Right? Instead of, tell me more. Let me hear from you. Let me hear how you understand X, Y, or Z. I see it this way, but tell me how you see it. You know, how many conversations don't we have around that part? Think about it. You know, it's like, hey, I know the way, and if you don't know the way, I'm sorry. Bye. I'll see you later. Well, instead, what about going the other direction? And say, look, you know something, I don't know much about this. I'm going to throw landline under the bus now. All right? Because landline takes all kinds of trips to very, very exotic places. And when she comes back, she's great at giving gifts. Right? And when the gifts come back, I can't read it. It's in a language that I can't even start to understand. But you know what I do? Say the great experiment. I open the box, right? And then I say, Wendy, have you tried it? That's how we start to come. You say, well, I like the ones in the brown wrapper, and I'm not too sure about the ones in the purple wrapper. And I say, okay, I think what we'll do is I'll take one of each and experiment and see what happens. Okay? But you have to be willing to take that leap, don't you? Because I don't know, but I'm willing to find out. I'm willing to create that piece, to create that great memory that she always comes and makes us feel proud of the work that she's doing, thankful and grateful that she's sharing with us her experiences. Okay? One of these things, I'm actually going to get a teacher musicology class, by the way. You know, she's actually in the philosophy department, but she does have a degree in psychology, so. But at any rate, see, yeah, most of you didn't even know all that good stuff, right? And these are the great discoveries you make when you start creating that community. When you start to build on it, when you start to think about it, when you start, how can I be a part of this whole thing, okay? Now, one more piece of this whole shared experiences. It does something else that I think is very important to all of us. It strengthens our bonds, okay? It pulls us together. We start to foster that empathy and understanding for one another. And we are stronger together than we are apart doing diverse things. Right? I mean, you know, a part of Jeff Moore's big mission is interdisciplinarity and collaboration. He preaches that every single day. And again, we're stronger together than we are apart. And we work together all the time on different kinds of projects. So we strengthen our bonds with all of those things, okay? Now, let's think about the interconnectedness of both shared values and shared experiences. Let's talk a bit about how they reinforce each other. What are your thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
Well, if you find a group of people who have similar values to yourself, for example, I'm part of a writers group. We every Tuesday we're going to write for like an hour. That can lead to you guys having shared experiences and talking about your own bonds.
Okay. Great example. What else? I know this side of the room is, I'm thinking, when you all get the grant together, you reinforce something, I understand. or when the grant doesn't come through, you come and talk to me and tell me all. But what kind of strengthening of the bonds? Really, think about that for a second. What makes a difference? How do you strengthen one another? Okay, I'll solve the mystery. Wouldn't it be nice just to talk to each other every now and then? Just think about it. You know I have interesting habits like we all do. One of my habits is if I typically think of anyone at any given time, it doesn't matter when I think of them. If I think of them, I call them up. And and many times when I make that phone call, there was I said, anything wrong? What's going on? What's happening? I said, no, I was just thinking about you. Right? And all of a sudden we get into a conversation about whatever. About the memories, about the experiences, about remember when we did this together, when we did that together, when we did this other. And sometimes what turns out to be a 3 to 5 minute, I'm just calling to say hi and see how you're doing, turns into an hour-long conversation. Because, again, you've built those values through those experiences that lead to that bond. Does that make sense to you? I mean, these things all have a real connectedness to them. Many times, even in our bureaucratic structure, and many times we get in the habit of this email, that email, the next email, the next email, the next email, 3 days later, the next email. And most of you that know me know I have all of your numbers right here. If I have a question, I will call you up because we could solve a lot of things in maybe 5 minutes that it would take 3 days of emails going back and forth to even understand what we were talking about. Okay? So there's just different ways of kind of going about this because we're trying to strengthen these bonds and make things stronger. Some of the big picture items, case studies that have been done on things like the civil rights movement, corporate culture. Every corporation has these great exercises that they call, what do they call these things? You know what it is, don't you?
Team building.
Team building, right? Now, how many of you have been involved in any team building exercises? Right? Are you still a member of that team? No. Not at all. Now, why aren't you still a member of that team? conversation again, right?
No communication.
Did you really have shared values? Did you even in that team building exercise have a real shared experience? Think about it. Because if you had either of those things leading to one or the other, you would probably still have that bond going. And in some cases you do, you know? Now I can tell you one, you know, from my background, music is a very democratic thing, okay? And I say democratic because we all have to pay attention to each other when you play music. You can't just be by yourself unless you play solely a solo piece. Most music is done in ensemble fashion, 2 or more people. And in that context, each person has to pay attention to the other. You know, one of the most democratic versions of that is jazz musicians. They're all listening to each other. The drummer's listening to the bass player's listening to the piano player, the piano player's listening to the guy playing the solo at this time or that time. They're all paying attention to each other to produce one singular project. Okay? They can't just be on their own thing. I'm just doing this tempo, and this person's playing at another tempo, and so on and so forth. They have to have some sense of, I hear where you are, I hear where you're going. I know what's getting ready to happen. In fact, I don't know what's getting ready to happen next, but I think I do. Because you're constantly paying attention to what's going on around you. One of my best friends, in fact, the guy that makes my mouthpieces for my trumpets, his name is Gary Rack, and he's up in the middle of Wisconsin, some little town called Alston. But he has the most sage advice all the time whenever I call him. One of his pieces of that advice, he says, always be aware of your surroundings. Think about that for a second. Always be aware of what's around you. What's going on? What's happening here? What's happening there? Now, none of that is done out of fear. It's done out of awareness. I know that this is happening. I know that that's happening because I'm always aware of it. That's the way musicians have to be all the time. That they're always listening, always aware of what's going on around them. I hope, when we finish this whole conversation, you'll walk away thinking that way. What environment am I in right now? Is that environment actually building me? Is it creating a newness in me? Is it creating something that I can build on? Or is it an environment where I'm going, I don't know, this is not too much fun hanging out with these guys. Okay? What kind of environment is around me all the time? And what am I spending time with and with whom? Are those people building, are they creating a better world for me? Am I creating something better for them? Are we having a better experience because of those kinds of things? I mean, to me, again, it comes back to where I started with, building a strong community. Being not just one that just exists, but not just one that we're just basically we're proud of. But what are we doing to make the world better? Again, I use that example of my teacher, Don Owen. And, things that stick with you for life. One of these phrases that most of you heard most of my recording sayings more than you care about, right? But one of his was, he said, always go home a little bit smarter than you left. Right? Now, that doesn't mean you had to write the next encyclopedia, but you know something coming home that you didn't know when you walked out of the door. It might be a simple thing. Hey, the police are patrolling Chapman right now. It could be as simple as something like that you know that there's something going on, right? And you were aware of it. And you report it back, so somebody else would get a ticket. But you always keep that in mind, that you're always going out to grow and to build and to do something that makes the world better. Okay? Let's see where. Get all my notes here. Yes. Okay. Another one of those things that and this whole piece of really thinking about this building piece more than anything else right now. The simplicity of what I've been talking about for the last whatever number of minutes here, It's very simple. I mean, there's nothing complicated about what I've been saying. But what's complicated about what I've been saying is the execution. You know, so what does that do for you to change the way you think at 5:45 from what it did at 5 o'clock? All right? This is the time that you get the feedback. Tell me what you think, you know? And I'll turn into the, what do you call it, Scott? I'll turn into something. So, well, actually, I think I'll turn into Jim Clark. How's that?
We have one, we don't need more.
All right, I need to hear from you. Give me your thoughts. I've thrown a lot of stuff out there. Does any of this make any resonate or make any sense to you? You know, because we're talking a lot about a lot of things here, right? So tell me, does anything resonate? What does it tell you right now from what I've been talking about so far? Come on in. You got to go to work?
I got to go to class.
Hey, it's good to see you. All right. All right, class. Tell me your thoughts.
I think we've left out the overall impact of culture and what your traditions might be and your way of movement or your manners, if you will. When Dr. Valerie King had the circle that represented elements of diversity, she talked about culture in that there are cultures that do not look you in the eye as a sign of respect. But in America, we expect you to look us right in the eye, face us, and shake our hands hard. There are people who don't touch other people of the opposite sex. There are individuals who were brought up as deaf students who know their language perfectly well, but the subject and verb are reversed in sign language. So when they write it, it's reversed. And they know exactly what they're talking about, but their sentence structure is different from what you might expect.
Yeah.
And so there are all kinds of things that are cultural that you may not eat, you may not care for in art because it's too revealing. There are things that bring you together in art and music and things like that. Sports teams bring you together. All of those, I think, represent shared values where you might overcome things that you don't participate in at home, but you learned about them and you learn to respect them. We have not yet used the word respect, and I think that's important.
Yeah. That piece of it comes, in my mind, again from that piece of empathy. You know, that when you're willing to actually hear what someone else thinks, feels, comes from, you know, then you start to value that respect part of, you know, as part of that. I have to tell you guys a good example of what you just described coming from a different culture. So when I started college, you know, in a music program, we take all kinds of tests on different kinds of things. One of them is ear training, we call it, right? So the professor sits at the piano and starts playing a melodic line, and then your job is now to write down all the notes and all the rhythm that the person plays, right? So when I got my very first test, this is why it's very important to be an astute teacher, okay? So when I got my first test back, I made a perfect 0. I missed every note. And so the teacher then called me up and he says, what instrument do you play? And I said, trumpet. He said, in B flat? He said, but I explained it. I was one step off in the entire exercise. Because when the B flat trumpet is a transposing instrument. So when you play B flat on the piano, it sounds C on the B flat trumpet. So I was one step off the entire exercise. So obviously once I figured that out, I just transposed what I heard in the right key, and then I made an A on every other test. But I told them, I said, you know something, if you hadn't come and told me that, I'd probably be a state senator or something like that. I wouldn't be doing this stuff. You know? But again, keep it in what I said earlier too. You never know who you're talking to or who you're working with. Now years later, when I became the chair of music here at UCF, right, I had the option of hiring someone to be my assistant chair. So guess who I actually hired? The person that gave me that exam as a freshman. So I always tell everybody, be careful how you treat those students. They could become your boss. Right? Again, you never know how the world turns with these kinds of things. But somebody was kind to me and helped me through a process, right? And then years later, I was able to actually repay a bit of that kindness back to that person at that point.
That's a John Washington approach to the student, to figure out how it could be so perfect, but wrong. It's a step off.
Yeah.
John would have called you up also. I keep going back to the theme, the name of this lecture series. He would have called you also.
Yeah. That's the way these things work. So that's good. All right. What other thoughts, please? Yes, sir.
I like your analogy about listening to your surroundings and other musicians. As a musician, I have a director this semester in the concert band, Mr. Schreier, and he always tells us if you can hear yourself, you're too loud. And because he wants to all be able to listen to other people around the band, because the more you can hear yourself, it's almost like you can apply to like your conversations with other people. The more you think about yourself, you can't slow down on the understanding and respect of the other person. So in music and in like society, you need to be able to slow down, hear other people, and understand what they are doing before you can like fix yourself.
I like this guy. Okay, anybody else, please? It's a good conversation, yes.
The intention around the community, the community wouldn't just happen upon you. You have to go out with the mindset of wanting to build connections with people. I know a lot of people, at least on social media, a lot of like people in Gen Z feel like there is a lack of community, but I think that's because they aren't purposely going out to try and seek those people who have those shared experiences, or like at least see people who they can create shared experiences with. So just going out with the intention of I want to foster an environment where there could be a community around it.
Now let's build on that for a second, all right? What do you think is the biggest reason why that doesn't happen as much as I think most of us would like? Think about that for a second. That's a great answer to this. Yes.
Well, I think it's probably because of they just being not to sound like those phones, but I think it's being online just all the time.
Bingo. You see, a big part of everything that we're all wanting, most of all in life, is again a shared experience. The shared experience is through a device, through a web, through a email, through this. But is that really a shared experience? I mean, yes, it communicates, it gets the job done to a great degree, but it's not one that you go away saying, I really feel good I was here. How many of you have actually been somewhere where you walked away and that was the feeling you had? I mean, I've been at concerts. I mean, I'm glad I was here tonight because that was something. I'm glad I heard that person talk tonight because that was a great influence on me. You were there. It was tactile. You could touch it. You could feel it. You could hear it right there. I mean, we all have many recordings of people performing, but it's not the same as when you're in the room with them and you have that experience. I mean, that's the reason why people go to live performances, go to live lectures, go to live whatever, because that's a visceral effect that you don't get otherwise. No matter how loud I might turn the sound system up, it's not the same as being in front of the band. I remember that I went to go see the Count Basie Orchestra not too long ago, and it was the PowerPoint this out. I walked across the way to get to my seat, and it was, if you were right in front of the band, you had one amazing experience. If you're sitting on the side, you had a different experience. So impact, you know, you have something directly hitting you in a way that made a difference that you can't explain, but you were there. So you had that. And you know something, if you go with somebody else, they had it too. And then you walk away and now you can call it, you know, we have experience together. That was called shared experience. You know? I mean, that's the point of what I'm really trying to make here. You know, that this is an important thing, especially at our time, and the kinds of lives that we all live. Look, I tell you, every time I drive on campus, you know, I try not to do what I call bowling for students. You know, because they're crossing the crosswalk, and they're all, there's a car here. Can't you see there's a car? There's a big vehicle. You know? That's right. Oh, yeah. Gloria, I called you the other day, by the way.
There's something.
I remember all the street.
Yeah, but you know, but I mean, think about it realistically. And I keep thinking, who are you all talking to? I mean, you just left the building. I mean, come on, you can't.
There's an unexplored rule that if you get hit by some car or something, they like pay your tuition.
You see the kind of things we discovered in these jobs. All right, look, I'm not going to keep you guys much longer, but I really want to know if there are any real questions you have on anything that I've rambled on about, you know, for the last 45 minutes or an hour. But I really do feel strongly about the things that I've been talking about. Because, you know, as life goes on, if we don't have these things, okay, you know, I just can see society just deteriorating. If we don't have some values or some values and experiences and things that we build on, you know, where are we going to go? I mean, we all become hermits. I would tell you that one of the biggest detriments to communities being built in neighborhoods was the invention of the garage door opener. Okay? Because you drive in your neighborhood, you hit that button, you drive in there, you hit that button, and you're going, and you don't know who's around. Who's your neighbor? I don't know, some guy lives over there. You know, somebody, I don't know. But see, if you grew up in another age, in early Florida, pre-air conditioning, by the way, everybody knew every neighbor and every block. Now, you know why? So you were sitting on the porch every night because it was so hot inside the house. And you would sit there, everybody in there fanning, and hi, Miss Johnson. Hi, Mr. Butler. How you doing today? You know, how's your knee while working so far? You know, that's the kind of conversations I used to hear growing up as a kid. You know, I mean, think about this. That was what was going on. You know, Miss So and So and Mr. And all those people tend to work in the same place, and they all tended to go to the same churches. So you know, you think about this, and everybody knew everybody else. But right now, we're dealing with that most of us don't know 5 neighbors in our own neighborhood. Unless you've been there a long time. You know, you had some transition. You know? But it's a different age now. You know? And here again, you can deal with Instagram, you can deal with Facebook, or whatever the latest thing is. Do we still have TikTok? Did it go away? But you have all of these different platforms, and even when people talk about things, I always ask, how do you get your information? You know, when you hear, most of you heard about this lecture series, you know, through things that, you know, through some meal, or you guys call each other, didn't you? Yeah, I know all that. But you know, and everybody here is coming from totally different backgrounds, totally different associations, you know. And the cool thing is, I know almost all of you. You know, I mean, that to me that's a pretty cool thing. You know, that we have this diversity of ages and people and backgrounds and subject areas and interests, but we've all come together around a common thing, common theme. Okay? So, any questions for me, please? Scott French.
So Lyman, I've always said you should have a documentary film crew follow you around for a week. And because you're always saying, I went to this, I went to that, and I'm here, and you're always excited about what you just saw and say, there should have been more people there, right? I don't understand it. The world is just full of all this incredible activity, cultural activity, events outside, but it's all out here and not in here, right? This space is where a lot of us live now, and where a lot of us are getting all the trauma and the fear is in here, what we're reading and seeing. And I think you're kind of giving us a model for living, which is, it's safer out here. It's better out here with people, face to face. And I know this is your model. You like to walk around and go to the people.
Well, Peter calls it my walkabout, right?
Yeah, but it is a way of living and humanities, arts and humanity. Here we are in the arts and humanities. We of all people, we of all people should be approaching life this way, right? That, UCF celebrates the arts. We celebrate this in really big, fancy ways, but we do it in small ways every day. And I don't think I know anybody else who does it better than you. You really love to get out there and with the people. And I think the fear that a lot of people have about getting out, or getting out of their comfort zone, I think the world is a comfort zone for you. You've made it comfortable to go out. Whatever fear you might have had about the unknown is gone after if you've done this a few times. You sort of get over yourself, right? You got to find a way to...
That's kind of the nuts and bolts of it.
I think that's what you're offering here, is a kind of way forward in a time that's very scary.
The other thing is, we become somewhat, again, with that garage door opener thing, we become somewhat provincial.
Yeah.
And that I talk to people all the time, and I'll say, well, yeah, there's a thing happening in Claremont. Way out there? Oh, who's going to go way out there? Oh my gosh, what's going to... do we have gas? What's going to happen if I get way out there? Am I going to get back? I'm going to go come rescue me from going way out there. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were asking me, you live in the neighborhood? I said, no. I said, well, how come you're here? Because this is a place to be. For what I was there for, this was a place to be. I said, so that's why I showed up. But we get that way where it's like, I'm only going this far, It's got that whole habit of, the somebody that passes on, a grandmother passes on a car that they've had for 20 years, and she only got 500 miles on it. It's like, man, she only drove to the store. The store must have been really close, But that's the way these things go. But we get, old habits die hard. We know that. We all are creatures of that. One of my habits is I never go to a location and come back from a location the same way. I always go one direction, and I go somewhere else to get there, to get back home or whatever. And I say, no, we don't do that. Well, because I discover things. I discover what streets actually go through. And I've gone down more dead ends in this community than anybody in town. So I said, I wonder where that goes. That's right. I'm back up. These people will look like they're sleeping. That's my safety issue. Get back up fast, but this one looks quite right. But that's how you learn things. Because especially in Central Florida, where every road dead ends into a lake. And all dead ends into a lake somewhere. So, anyway, I want to thank you all for indulging me.